The last question that I have, it's another topic, but I'm very curious about your theory about it. We've been seeing problems with Muslim immigrants in Western Europe and certain cities, London, Brussels, Paris. What do you see about problems with Muslim immigrants? Because I did some research, and again, AI said it's fake, that Albert Pike was talking about the World War III and that it was going to be against the Muslims. What is your view of everything that's happening with the Muslims, stab attacks, grooming, and is there a link with the underlying agenda? Because what's going on there, according to you?
Well, what they want is a civil war in these various countries, which will allow them to impose their fascist tyranny to stop the war, stop the civil war. And the more extreme stories appear in the newspapers and online about Muslim migrants and what they do, some of them do, the better for the cult, because it makes the population furious and angry and frustrated about what they see as their culture being overridden and taken over. Now, I remember as a kid when I first heard about the British Empire and the other European empires too, and how they went into these countries all over the world and took them over and imposed their version of everything on the population. And I was appalled that anyone could do that. And in reverse now, we're seeing the same thing happening. We're seeing in cities across Europe and the United States, but Europe's a massive example, Britain, of another culture taking over from the indigenous culture, or as indigenous as you want to go back anyway. And the question is why? And you can't get away when you research this from Israel. Not Jewish people in general, although they are some of the most programmed people from cradle to grave you'll ever meet because of the way that they are programmed to believe what their leaders, who don't have their best interests at heart, by the way, want them to believe. But what you are looking at, and if you do any research, you can uncover this. There are elements coming out of Israel, your Mossads and etc., that are behind this massive influx of migrants from the Middle East and elsewhere too into Europe and through the southern border into America for a long time. And so why? You really have to get into the mindset of some of these people. They are utterly insane. And I'm not using that as a metaphor, I'm using it literally. They believe, the most extreme of them, in this ludicrous, and I can show that it's ludicrous, Old Testament story of the emergence of the Jewish people and ancient Israel. And part of that is that they say that there have been two temples in Jerusalem, and the Messiah, it's not Jesus, it's the Jewish Messiah, will return only when certain things happen. They talk about the third temple on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is now and has been for so long. And if you'd have said not that long ago that the plan is to demolish the mosque and replace it with a third Solomon's, quote, temple, then people will have said, you are mad, mate. It would be a bloodbath. But now look at it. Gaza is destroyed. The people of Gaza, the Palestinians of Gaza, are in a desperate state. The West Bank, the other area of Palestinians, is being basically deleted in terms of Palestinian occupation and replaced by Jewish settlers supported by the United States and Trump. And the IDF is now in control. So suddenly, demolishing the mosque and putting another one, a new Solomon's Temple in its place, becomes less crazy as a suggestion than it would have been before. And these people are so crazy and so welded to these ludicrous ancient stories that have no basis in reality, that they believe that before the temple can be built, they have to sacrifice red heifers that have never had a yoke on their back, etc., and never given birth, and loads of other criteria. And they have to sacrifice one of those and mix it with certain things, and then that has to happen before the temple can be returned and the Messiah come. They've imported red heifers from Texas to Israel, and they've just sacrificed one. It had 2 black hairs on its back, which meant that it wasn't appropriate for the real ceremony, so they had to practice one relatively recently to play that out. And crucially, what they say must happen before the Messiah can come is that Edom must be destroyed. And Edom is the West. It is Europe. It is the United States and Canada, etc. And you listen to these stunningly extremist rabbis who are saying that Edom must be destroyed and that Islam is their means to do it. And then you start looking at people like George Soros of the Open Society Foundations and his son, who have put billions of dollars, billions, tens of billions of dollars into this Open Society Foundation. Open society equals open borders, to fund this surge of movement from the Middle East and other countries into Europe. And if you then look at how it started, it really got underway because of wars instigated by the United States and Britain, Tony Blair, in Iraq, in Libya, through another British Prime Minister, David Cameron, and Barack Obama, and other countries. And they knew that when they create war and devastation, and they've absolutely devastated Libya, they're now having slave markets in the towns. You're not going to go south looking for a new life. You're going to go north into Europe, which is what they did. And as a result of that massive movement of people, initially to get away from the conflict, which had been manufactured, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, yeah, that turned out to be true, didn't it? Other people from other countries have gone on the back of that and have moved in enormous numbers into Europe. Now more and more are coming across the channel into Britain, which is creating a lot of tension and fury in the UK. And the idea is that the indigenous population, which includes many former migrants and migrant families that were born here, is designed to be in a civil war on the basis of cultural conflict. Because the migrants are not, and I say the migrants, I'm talking about the extreme ones, not rank and file people who just want a better life. But the migrants in that criteria have no interest in assimilating into the population and respecting the indigenous culture. They want to impose their own. And this is the really key thing that has to be addressed and understood. Because boats, dinghies, are coming from France to Britain, and it's systematic. It's been exposed how the dinghies that are being used by people traffickers, when they arrive on the east coast of Britain, they're being put on trucks and taken back to France so they can be used again by the government. And how these pristine life jackets are being worn by the migrants coming over. Why would a people trafficker group be interested in the safety of migrants? As long as they've got their money, it's over. Couldn't care less what happens after that, they'd say. But they have these pristine new life jackets, and they're taken back so they can be used again. And the government, at the same time, is saying, oh, no, we must stop the people traffickers. You are the people traffickers. And what is also happening is the French Navy this has been proved with the leaking of communications between the two. The French Navy is escorting these dinghies into the area of the British Border Police, and the British Border Police are taking over and helping them get into to the east coast of Britain. It's all systematic. And this is the key point, because you can see the people in the dinghies very clearly that they're not. Overwhelmingly, they are not families, mothers and children fleeing war. They're coming from France. They are military-aged young men. And they're coming into this country, as they've gone into Europe, in fantastic numbers. Now, that's not a coincidence that all these military-age young men are being infused into British society. They're being given enormous benefits from the government that the indigenous population don't get and can't get. And it's all encouraging the flow to get bigger and bigger, and it's leading somewhere. And when you then go to these extreme rabbis in Israel who are saying we're using Islam to destroy Edom, the West, which has to be destroyed before the Messiah can come, then you start to get a kind of idea of how this fits together. And there are rabbis in Israel who have said that Donald Trump will go down eternally for serving the interests of this by destroying America, which is what he's doing. Everything that America claimed to once stand for, he's dismantling, not least with these tariffs, which are not paid by the exporting country, they're paid by the importer in the United States that then has to pass the cost on, or most of it, to the public in higher prices. And you've got Trump saying, oh, all these countries are giving us all this money now with the tariffs. No, they're not giving you a penny, and you know that, you liar. The money you say you're accumulating is coming from the people you said you represented in higher prices. This is why inflation's starting to really wind up in the United States. So the thing is, whenever any of these people in authority tell you something, the thing to do is to go on the premise that they're lying to you. Now, you do a bit of research, and every now and again, and it is only now and again, you'll find that they were telling the truth, or at least partly the truth in this case. But overwhelmingly, you will find they were indeed lying, because that's their job. Because this is a perceptual conspiracy to control perception, to control behavior. And lying is the bottom line foundation essential to that. And therefore, instead of saying they're the authority and they're the government and they wouldn't lie to us, or accept that what they're saying is true, you take as a matter of course the fact that if they say it's happening, it's not. And if they say they'll do it, they won't. And if they say they won't do it, they will. They're lying to you. And that, I can tell you, saves a lot of grief further down the road when you realize they were indeed lying to you because of the events that unfold. And the thing is that we look at countries, look at Belgium and the Netherlands and Britain and America and Canada and so on. But each of them has a deep state. In other words, a network that runs the country from the shadows. But you go to the next level, and all those deep states answer to the same force. It's a global agenda. And that's why people that say, we've just got to focus on America. And people say to me, why are you always talking about America? Because you're in Britain. Why don't you look after your own country? Simple. Because America is Britain, is Belgium, is the Netherlands, is Germany, once you get to that level above that.